just start off by saying, I hear people saying wind is free, it's free energy. Well, let me tell you, it's just as free as the oil in the ground or the coal in the ground. It's utilising the costs. So that's a silly argument. But one of the ones, of course, is tidal power. Currents are free. Well, they're there, but we have to harness them. And that's what this video is about. It's about the delusions of tidal power. And I go through it. Anyone can understand this. There's nothing complex in it at all. So I'll take you on a journey through tidal power and show you why, in real life, it's delusional. We first need to understand the nature of tides. Those of you who understand the nature of tides can skip this section. I have to do it because I try to make videos for everybody, so I don't assume everyone understands tides. This is a simple graph of a rising tide, and the speed of the current starts off very slow. We'll take it from the low point here for the tide, and it's very slow, and as the tide comes in, on the flood side of it, the flood tide, it actually rises and the current gets faster and faster and faster, and it's at its fastest here about the middle, and then it starts to slow down again until it gets to the top, and it's very slow, still slow, as it now starts to go out again here, slow, accelerating, and then slow. So there's a thing we use in sailing called the rule of twelfths, which maybe explains it better. So I'll show you that now. So starting at the bottom here in the first hour of the incoming tide, you just get 0.3 of a metre, if you like, in this example. In the second hour, you get twice as much tide. You get twice as much, and therefore much more current. In the third hour, you get 3 times the original. So you get, you get 3 0.3s. And this, in the fourth hour, you get the same. So that third and fourth hour account for that 2 hours accounts for half of the total tide and half, broadly, of the total current. And then the fifth hour, it slows down, you only get 2 units, and in the sixth hour, you just get the 1. So that's the nature of it, this acceleration and deacceleration. And the energy that goes with that is shown here. Now, it's not as simple as directly proportional, but basically nearly all the energy is created on the higher currents, as it were, in the tide. So if you just put a propeller in there, a turbine in there, you would actually get most of the energy out of it in those middle. And don't forget, at very low speeds, the turbine won't turn at all. So it's a basic feature of tides. Now, another thing about tides is they're not all the same all the time. They vary on a monthly basis, and let me explain that. There is a high tide called a spring tide, when the sun, the moon, and the earth are all in one line, so that the moon and the sun, if you like, are on the same side, sort of thing. So everything's in line, and you get the maximum gravitational pull. That's when you get these big spring tides. But on the other hand, when the moon is at right angles, then you get the neap tides, and these have higher low tides and lower high tides. They advance by about 20 minutes a tide. So about the actual amount of high or low times vary every day. Every single tide is basically different. As we head from the springs to the neaps, then back again to the springs. So the take-home from that very simple explanation, and why I bothered to explain it, was so you understand that the energy coming from the tide does not suit when you need it most. Whilst it can be precisely predicted what you're going to get and when you're going to get it, it doesn't suit a nice steady supply or anything else like that. So what happens is you have to have something else like gas in order to be able to constantly take it up and take it down to balance the system. So that is its nature, and that's fundamental to understanding the economics and viability of tidal power. Now in this section, I'm going to just do a little bit of history to show you the energy coming from tides that we've used historically. And the most famous one is in France, and these are barrages across rivers. Now there are 2 ways of basically getting energy out of currents, sea currents. One is putting a barrage across and controlling that way, with the difference in heads between one side of the barrage and the other. That's the difference in height of the water between one side and the other, gives you the current. But the other way is just to put a turbine in the water, and as the tide comes one way, it turns it. As it comes the other way, it turns it. No barrage needed. But the history tends to be barrages. So let's take a very quick look to give you a perspective. The very first use of tidal energy we've ever found so far dates back to 619, so a long time ago. And that was found in Northern Ireland by a monastery, where they used the tidal energy to grind cereals. And most of the tidal energy uses, which have been both sides of the Atlantic, hundreds of them, in fact hundreds, in the London area and UK, let alone America, but they were all used to turn wheels, just like water wheels in rivers were used in mills to grind corn. Just the same, except what they tended to do was take the water in on the high tide, trap it, and then as the tide lowered, let the water out to turn the wheel and then grind the corn. So they were the first uses of tidal power, as it were. Now we have to flash forward to 1967, when Lawrence in France built the first barrage turbine that converted the tidal energy into electric energy. But even today, if you look at the entire world of these systems, it's just a handful, and here they are. The biggest one of all these now is in China, which only just beats the French one. But if you actually look at the megawatt rating, that's the maximum nominal nameplate rating, if you like, of all these added together, it only comes to 526.25 megawatts. That's right, the entire world's tidal barrage system come to 526.25 megawatts. And you don't get that out, of course. That's just the nominal rating of the turbines. So how much energy do you get out? Well, let's take that French one as an example. We do have some details here. The power station has 24 turbines, and these reach a total peak at 240 megawatts. That's at the peak of that middle tide range, and produce an annual output of approximately 500 gigawatt hours. 491 in 2009, 523 in 2010. Thus the average output's approximately 57 megawatts, and the capacity factor is approximately 24%. So let's check that. It's 240 megawatts, that's the theoretical limit, times 24 hours, times 365 days is 2,102,400 megawatt hours. That's what comes out in a year. The actual claimed per year was 500 gigawatt hour, which is 500,000 megawatt hours. So it's 500,000 divided by 2,102,400, and that's about 24%. So the claim checks out. Now we have a good idea of what the load factor is, the capacity factor, same thing. We can simply say that the 526.25 megawatts, that is the world capacity, nameplate capacity for all the turbines, times 24%, and we get 126 megawatts. That's the average output rating from the entire world's barrages, the entire world's tidal power. And so that has to be compared to what a gas station gives. So we need to compare the combined world tidal power giving an average output of 126 megawatts output, which varies from nothing to well above that in tide cycles and has to be supported when it gives no power at all. We have to compare that to, say, one individual gas station. Here I take a typical gas power plant. This is Pembroke. It has 2,181 megawatt output, and it does that all the time, every minute. So how do we compare that to the 126 megawatts coming from all the world's commercial tidal power stations? There we are. One gas station, one typical gas station, will provide 17 times, in fact over 17 times, the amount of electricity that all the world's tidal power stations to date can provide in total. So all the world power stations only amount to about 5.7% of the output of one gas station. And not only that, the gas station provides that every minute. Unlike the tidal power station, that goes down to zero and up and varies all the time. Well, there we are. That cost 800 million to build in 2012, which is round about 1,120 million pounds in today's prices. And that comes down to £500,000 per megawatt. But just as a cross-check, let's flip over to a much later one that's just been built and check what that's costing per megawatt. Well, there it is. Keadby Power Station comes in at £0.4 million per megawatt. That's a more recent and more accurate figure. So we'll take that one, but I'm just trying to give you a general guide as to what normal gas power stations cost. So how much would, say, a tidal barrage cost to build today? Well, we don't have to look far. We have some grand schemes on how to spend other people's money. And I go to my hometown where I was born, Liverpool. A tidal barrage across the River Mersey. Liverpool are promoting this wonderful new barrage that will provide energy. And it'll also provide a pedestrian and cyclist walkway across the Mersey. You know, there's all sorts of implications to this environmentally, etc. But let's look at the overall cost and the energy you're getting out of this new tidal barrage. Well, this is the world, or would be, the world's largest tidal barrage. It'd be 700 megawatts. That's the size of the turbines, not the power we get out. And it would put Liverpool on the map as having that world largest thing. What prestige! You know, it's a terrific way to spend other people's money. So how much power do we actually get out of the 700 megawatts? Well, we can apply the 24% factor because the tides are pretty the same as regards what we get out, the capacity factors. So 24% of 700 is 168 megawatts, and that would vary between zero output and about 600 megawatts. But the average would be 168 megawatts. Not much of a gas station, is it? You know, and what is the cost of this 168 megawatts average output? Well, it's estimated at 3.5 billion. But we all know these public venture estimates never stay the same. And I reckon you could double that to 7 billion easily. But let's assume they do everything perfect and the costs work out as they expect, which I guarantee they won't. And let's assume, therefore, it's £3.5 billion. So how much does that cost per megawatt coming out? You know, the rate, to get that rate out. How much are we paying for the installation to get that out? Well, that's an incredible over £20 million per unreliable megawatt out. Now, that's 168 megawatts coming out on average, but sometimes nothing, and sometimes maybe 600. But overall, an average of 168 at a cost of £20 million per megawatt. Compare that to the 0.4 million pounds per megawatt from a gas station. Some 52 times more in capital costs alone. And of course that capital cost has to be recovered. So the interest payments alone on that capital cost make every megawatt coming out very, very expensive. Of course, with all the high variability of tidal power, you still need the gas to back it all up. And whilst that gas is in abeyance, it's actually having to keep ticking over and wasting energy. It's having to actually increase the cost of the gas. In fact, currently, gas prices are about 25% higher than they should be, simply because they're being used as backup. The fact is that as gas to power capacity utilisation shrinks, because we are reducing it, we're almost halving it under current plans, the cost of balancing the grid commensurately rises. So having looked at barrages that are so expensive to construct, to get so little out, it's a question of they fail. They're just totally out of the question as regards cost to the public. And all that cost for an intermittent supply is absurd. But there is one more way of actually getting energy out, and that is by just putting a turbine into a strong current. And We're now going to look at that, and its name is streaming, so it's tidal streaming power. So let's take a look at that. Well, there are various ways of sticking a turbine into water, and you would tend to put it where there's a strong current, and of course it can turn and be suitable for any direction of the current. So in many ways it's a lot more logical trying to do it this way than trying to do it with a barrage. But there are environmental problems, and so just like wind farms chop up birds and bats and insects, these can cause all sorts of environmental problems, from silting to damage to fish, etc. But putting all that aside, let's look at the economics of tidal streaming. First, a tiny bit of history. It was tried in the Bay of Fundy in Canada. That's the world's biggest tidal range. And I'm afraid the turbines got ripped apart. It basically failed, although people are trying again now. So it isn't without its problems. So let's catch up to date and take a look at a very recent project in the Bay of Fundy and how that turned out.
The Scottish company Sustainable Marine has developed the Plat-1 technology, which is an innovative floating tidal energy system. Their Plat-1 is equipped with 6 in-stream turbines that can generate up to 70 kilowatts, which means the entire platform can deliver 420 kilowatts of power.
That is a very small amount of energy, 0.42 of a megawatt. So if you multiply the 0.42 by the 24 hours in the day, by the 365 days in a year, you get out 3,679 megawatt hours a year. Being generous and giving them a 40% load factor, that reduces it to 1471 megawatt hours a year, and divide by the 14.2 for the average home, and you get 103 homes. So what did they claim?
Is to reduce 17,000 tons of CO2 equivalents annually and power approximately 3,000 homes.
Well, the project wasn't that sustainable. I'm going to read out the actual official documents here. Sustainable Marine then developed the next iteration of the floating tidal energy platform, the Plat-1, which was demonstrated in Canada, which became the first floating in-stream tidal technology to generate power into the Nova Scotia grid. AMC, that's the European Marine Energy Centre, continued working with Sustainable Marine on the UMAC project to develop and demonstrate a generic foundation mooring solution to reduce cost and improve operations and maintenance methods. Unfortunately, in August 2023, administrators were appointed following permitting issues in Canada, resulting in the suspension of its Canadian operations and subsequent insolvency of the Canadian subsidiary in May 2023. So that was the end of that one. But there is a more successful project on tidal streaming in Scotland, in the Orkneys, and they've taken the tidal stream between a couple of islands where you've got high tidal streams one way and then the other way, as has been explained to you with the turn of the tides. And this is how they announced that one, and it's actually in operation.
O2 in April of this year. This platform has twin 20-meter rotors on the ends of 18-meter long articulating arms, which means sweeping more than 600 square meters of area below the surface. Anchors can moor in powerful tidal streams or river currents, and the underwater blades harness the energy from tides. The platform can generate clean, predictable electricity to meet the demand of around 2,000 UK homes and offset approximately 2,200 tons of CO2 equivalent production per year. The most interesting part is that it can be launched like a ship and float out to its location to be moored, commissioned, and connected to the grid.
I have a lot of respect for the engineering here. They've taken 15 years to develop it, and I think they're a totally honest, open company. They're quite clear when you actually look at what they say rather than what the journalists say. They can only obviously produce enough energy to totally power about 500 homes. By the way, that 2,000 is assuming a lot comes from gas, and that's given them a generous load factor. But the problem here again is it's being produced remotely in tiny quantities. So you're looking at getting let's say, if they say claiming 2 megawatts, you're going to get an average out of less than 1, 0.8, 0.9 or something. And you've got a long distance to go. You've got big high costs here, and the company are quite honest about it. And so given the parameters they've been given and the work they've been given to do, they're doing a good job. The problem is it doesn't make economic sense, and that's what we're going to look at now.
Orbital Marine Power Chief Executive Andrew Scott said, "We've been developing this technology here in the UK for over 15 years. Orbital estimates the levelized cost of electricity for the first 2 megawatt O2 turbine to be under £200 per megawatt hour."
Let's see what we're actually paying for tidal streaming. Well, there's all the contracts awarded just this last month or two, and we're paying £172 per megawatt hour, and that is based on 2012 prices. We have to increase that by 40% for inflation to bring it up to date, because all these prices are index linked, so they always rise, and it's £240.80 per megawatt hour. That's what we are actually paying them for it. That makes it the most expensive form of renewable energy we're being offered, and we've just agreed to all those contracts. But what you see as the public is 6 tidal stream projects successful in the UK's latest renewable auctions. And read what it says. The result of the allocation round 6, AR6, of the UK's contracts for the difference renewable auctions were announced today. 6 projects across the site successfully secured contracts to deliver 28 megawatts of tidal stream capacity at £172 per megawatt hour. Now, you know already it's not 172 because they're always quoted in 2012 prices. That's total deception by the government, in my opinion. And on top of that, of course, we don't really get 28 megawatts out of this. We get less, maybe less than half of that. So let's say we get 10 or 12 megawatts out of it. But the gas station in Pembroke we highlighted earlier gives over 2,000 megawatts. It doesn't make sense. We can have gas, and this still needs gas to back it up. It still has all the variations in it of the tidal streams, and it needs gas to back it up. There is no sense to any of this. But the journalists themselves often don't even realise when they quote these prices that they're quoting 2012 prices. And I have to say, this company doing this orbital is fairly honest. Here's what they say.
The boss of Orkney's tidal power initiative is Andrew Scott, but even he admits this is not a cheap option and it's taken 15 years to get them this far.
So knowing what you know already, can you understand how the public are deceived with journalistic hype like this?
It clears and we find ourselves in the middle of power and energy on a scale beyond human comprehension.
So beyond human comprehension that the entire output of all the tidal stream projects in the UK only amount to an average output of 10 or 12 megawatts, when a single gas station can produce over 2,000. Yes, unimaginable quantities of energy. It's absurd what you're being fed.
Muckle Greenholm Island to one side, Edy Island to the other, and between the two a trough of gigantic energy where the North Sea waters meet the Atlantic waters, and every day around the clock, around the phases of the moon, millions of tons of water sweep through this chasm, producing endless, predictable, clean energy.
And of course, the power is very remote. Now, the National Grid is spending £12 billion a year, £60 billion over the next 5 years, destroying our countryside with all the pylons and things to connect all this. And don't forget, these people get paid for how much power they produce at source, but there's a hell of a lot of energy loss between there and when it gets to where it's used, and they don't allow for that. So the whole concept from top to bottom is absurdly expensive, and if you know the facts, if the public really knew these facts, then they wouldn't go ahead with it. They'd stop the silliness of Ed Miliband, because he is totally bonkers on this.